Back in the room with the phones. You didn't see this coming, right? The old Juicerino before I make my video. I'm talking about these beautiful pieces of machinery. It gets me so fired up too. Even their bits are beautiful. But let's get back to this. My ye old nemesis. The most heinous iPhone. We have here an iPhone 6 Plus, 128 gigabyte. This thing has been so helpful as the main device that syncs all of the music and the data and the contacts and all the fake notes and calendar things I do with the pods over here that I'm gonna sell that you can explore. Work for the people need to see your grossness. I'll show you how I get this boy working, but it's not pretty. Okay, so basically, we're looking at this design. When this thing came out, people were like, yes, Apple, you made a phone bigger because Samsung and Google were beating you with their Nexus and Samsung products, and you were just lacking. Like, this is so bad, it's not big enough. I need to watch my YouTube on a big screen, even though garbage. $1,000 worth of garbage. I hate this. Tim Cook's product style is just trash and needs to change. And it did change because he learned from his mistakes. Really nice soft aluminum that feels really nice when you touch it, and it gets really cold in the wintertime. And oh my God, I knew so many people who owned a 6. We have plastic antenna bands. These things actually melted and they get really sticky over time. It just breaks the entire symmetry of the phone. Like if these antenna bands weren't here, it would be a totally different story. And in the iPhone 7 Plus, they moved the antenna bands up here so you didn't see them as often. So it's just nice one sheet of aluminum. This plastic here can create a breaking point where if you watch everything Apple Pro's video, this is where the 6 and 6 Plus can snap when you bend them and contort them the wrong way. This guy also has a dent. I think someone dropped something on it. It's just not a very good looking phone. There's too much going on, and also all this business down here. I get it, Apple, you need your people to know that you can't throw it away and that you're FCC compliant and that you also have more information, and then you also have ECC compliancy, and then all of this mumbo jumbo yada yada. You don't need that nowadays. I don't know why they kept putting it on here, because on the iPhone 4 they didn't need it. Also, I hate the font. It's just like, look at this font. It's so much more blocky and so much more pronounced. Too short. I like bolding things. You know where they got this design from? Do you really want to know? Because I think we got a boy right here that can tell you that story. Well, on the newer iPhones, there's that too, but there isn't that section in there. And that section was taken from the iPods where you had the little break in the middle. It's the touch disease all over the place. I don't understand why Apple didn't fix this, and I know what the problem is because the touch layer is right here. Well, with this thing being so thin, everything is rammed. And I don't know why, but these ribbon cables up here seem to get disconnected, snap into place, and they stay there. You drop this, the thing snaps. You drop this, you get a dent, you destroy your headphone jack, and things don't stay together. When you go into the phone and you look at the operating system on it, everything is just so laggy and so slow. I have to get the signal. All right, we got to work with the squeeze technique.
I literally can't with this thing.
Yeah, that's the bend I'm talking about. That's the basic premise of it. 6 sucks. I won't be collecting any of them. And this is the 128 gig model. Think of all the people on 16 gigs. 16 gigs at $649. No, you can record 32 minutes of video and your phone is filled up. Done. There you go. And absolutely horrendous. Now, they did bump it up to 32, but 32 gigs nowadays is completely unusable. 8 gigs. Oh my God, don't. You have a photo, an app, and you're toast. Playing an app, it would just crash because there was no more storage. That is so much fun when you're in a Clash of Clans battle, you're trying to do stuff, and then all of a sudden your phone's like, I need help! It's so annoying, and this thing was the king of it, and the 64 gig models were $1,000. When Apple released the $1,000 iPhone 10, I'm like, that's justifiable, because you get a little bit less storage than this guy, and you get Face ID in this gorgeous display, because this thing was $1,000. This thing was $1,000 back in the day. The iPhone X provides way more than any of this, and I covered that in the 5S video. So don't complain that your iPhone's just expensive, because you don't want an expensive product that's not going to last like this thing. And that iPhone 10 and iPhone 8 are, oh my God, are they going to last? Not so much the 8, but the 8 Plus, because that has 1 more gig of RAM, and this thing's already kind of getting slow and wonky. There you have it, the worst. My uncle has never used an iPhone past this point. Now, my uncle is also a pilot, so it kind of makes sense that he has an Android phone because there's a lot of Android features that appeal to pilots, like clock widgets and different things that they can do with their home screen to make their jobs a lot easier. So there are a few professions out there that I think Android phones are better, and I think he made the right choice when it came to choosing an Android phone, although it makes FaceTime calls with the family kind of annoying because we have to use Zoom, but he can always just get an iPhone and use his iPad. And my uncle really loves his iPad. He had an iPad 2 for the longest time, and then he upgraded to an iPad Air and an iPad Pro, and when he started using these Apple products, he was like, hey, I want to diversify my lineup into the phone world, and he ended up getting shafted. So it's very sad, but bottom line is get your phones new, get your phones from a trusted source, and it's good to save a little bit of money, but just think about what's happening in the world, and just try to do your research when it comes to different flaws a phone might have in different reviews and things like that. You little shit. My uncle went from the HTC Evo to an iPhone 6, which we have right here. It's running iOS 12. He didn't really use it for much because we have problems. So as you know, the iPhone 6 is a bit of a shit show when it comes to Apple products. It is most definitely the worst iPhone to ever be released at all time. All of these iPhones are good. This guy, he came out a little late because Apple couldn't get the color right. This guy, on LTE, the battery wasn't bad. This guy's just flawless. I mean, iPhone 5S, are you kidding me right now? With this beautiful look, like, spicy, thickum, spicy yum yum. And then we have just a generic, iPhone 6S Plus here, which is, it's not the most beautiful looking phone by any means because of all this nonsense here, the white bands obstructing everything, but it ain't bad. This thing is hot garbage. And, this thing's very light. People like that. They like that it's thin. But it does the old bendy bendies. And this phone was not bought from Apple, so it's even worse than the Apple ones. Apple phones usually, as they get older, they rarely have any issues. Like this thing, it still turns on, it still works fine. Yeah, it's a little slow and it's a little cracked, but it will do whatever you need it to do. These phones do the same thing. This is the only iPhone I've ever owned besides like a 4S that's inherently slow on its latest version of iOS. The iPhone 5, it's okay. The iPhone 6S is very fast, but the battery life drains way too fast. This thing is perfect. It gets everything at 30 frames. It's a beast. But this phone literally has so many issues, and we're going to cover them all today, because not only was this a rocky launch for Apple, it was also the downfall of one of the companies we know of as Sprint. RAM lock once again. Keep in mind, this phone is running the same graphics processor as this phone and as this phone. They barely changed it. It wasn't until the 6S where we got a huge graphics jump with that motion coprocessor. The M8, the M7, and the M6 were virtually unchanged coming from the iPhone 4S. Now, when it comes to just the sheer annoyance of this phone is the fact that it's a bigger display. And when you get to the 6 Plus, it's an even bigger display. And you cannot have 1 gig of RAM when you are pushing more pixels. And you cannot have a graphical engine when you're pushing more pixels. That's why the graphics cards in the MacBook Pros are better than the graphics cards in the MacBook Airs, is because the screens are bigger. There's more pixels. But Apple did not understand that. That was the first problem. When this phone came out, its Geekbench scores were lower than the iPhone 5S. Now, Apple doesn't really care about Geekbench scores all that often, but man, oh man, oh man, oh man, is it really, really annoying when the latest generation comes out and it's even worse. The iPhone 6 Plus, though, these things came out, they were bent, they were misshapen. When it came to people getting refurbished ones, it was just not a good deal, because these people, when they would get these refurbished phones, they would just bend the chassis back, and this was a case where the chassis was bent back. As you can see, the chassis was bent this way, and someone did a little this really hard to get it back to where it was so they could put in a new crappy screen, they could replace the battery, and they can sell it as a new phone. Although my uncle did drop it and make a big dent though, so that was his fault. But when it came to the older iPhones, they didn't have that problem, so all you needed to do was replace the screen and you were golden. Well, with the 6, there was other issues. When you dropped it a certain way, you could crumple and dislodge your headphone jacks. There are so many videos of people messing up their headphone jacks because of this, and once that jack was messed up back in the iOS 8 and 9 days, you didn't have another alternative. Now we have all these dongle-doos and adapters for our phones, but that didn't really exist back in the day when it came to iOS 8. The fact that it didn't run its original operating system very well, the fact that it didn't run iOS 9 very well, or iOS 10. And when you're stressing these phones out with Pokemon Go, which this phone was at the time one of the best phones to get for Pokemon Go, the 6 and the 6S, because it was that summer before the iPhone 7 came out that we got that game, and oh boy did it destroy the battery lives in these these phones. Then leading up to iOS 10, we had a lot of issues with the original versions of iOS 10. On the 6, it got better, but then it didn't, and then it sucked even more. And then on iOS 11, we had the famous Samsung ad where they were trashing Apple for their handling of iOS 11 on the 6 and the 5S. The 5S great on iOS 11. The 6 Plus great on iOS 11 with those 2 gigs of, but oh my god, on the iPhone 6 with the inability to like have any consistency with your phone and that 1 gig of RAM bottlenecking, and with all of the logic board and display manufacturing issues they had with this phone, although they made a lot of money out of this phone, had lost a lot of the reputation with it. And it is very sad when it comes to people that are getting these things refurbished that they can't get a nice, good, high quality product because the original product was flawed. Now, why am I talking about this piece of shit? Well, it so happens to be that my uncle bought one of these pieces of shit a long time ago with Sprint on 3G. Thinking, how could a carrier frick up a phone? I mean, that's what they're supposed to specialize in. But what Sprint did with this phone is they ran into some software issues when it came to carrier updates. One day in about 2016, there was a carrier update for these phones in which the T-Mobile and Sprint carriers with their 3G plans would not work with iPhones. It bricked the entire thing. And there were a lot of people that were actually complaining about this. And when it comes to doing research about what happens to your phones, you usually go to the person that made it. Well, if you did not buy this from Apple, which this phone is not bought from Apple, if I go here and I start picking at this, you can see that there is a screen overlap there. Also, do you see all of these marks in the screen here? That is not real glass. That is a plastic polymer that is applied to glass to make it feel like glass when it's a cheaper glass. And I can literally lift up into that phone right there. This is not Apple. This is not what Apple ships out. Also, you can see how on the back of the aluminum that happened when the phone is left out in the sun. You can also see that the antennas melted, which they learned from and then fixed in their later models of iPhone 6S and iPhone 7. So this thing was a total shit show. And it's not like they didn't have antenna knowledge before. I mean, like we had antennas here. The antennas for these phones were here, and then the glass on the back served as antenna. Like Apple, you've known about antennas for so long. How the hell did you mess up how harsh people are actually with their technology? People drop their things a lot. And in a regular Apple fashion, when you leave your phone on the table or when you have a case with your phone, this wasn't have a rugged case, these issues would persist. Now, the issues with this phone did not come with Apple. This phone actually works completely fine considering the fact that there are many iPhone 6s that I've interacted with that have display issues and other things like that. It's the only iPhone I've had that has had an issue. In my entire life of owning the iPhone 6S did not have this problem on 3G, nor did the iPhone 8, 7, or any of the iPhones that had it before. It was just this because of that stupid Qualcomm chip they used in here for better cellular connectivity with these antenna bands that they used for 1 year, and then they switched back to the old good stuff. But there was a custom-made chip by Qualcomm in this phone that was then recalled for the Sprint and T-Mobile models. Sprint didn't offer any upgrades. They just said, well, I mean, you're screwed, so what have you. And many people brought their phones to Apple. Apple told them they couldn't do anything because it didn't come up in the registry as a phone that was bought by Apple. And then what happened was they were left alone to just wither and whatever. So this phone sat in a drawer. It was used for like some things. I mean, I don't really know what it was used for. But yeah, that is the history of Sprint, the iPhone 6. That's why I don't recommend you getting any phones from carriers that are older, because you have no idea where the phones have came from.